Commission.
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair Vicky Ashley. Commissioner Russ Hargrave.
Here.
Chair Marcus Swift. Commissioner Lynn McIntyre. Commissioner Mike Davis.
Here.
And looks like Chair Commissioner Chris Shano is absent. Commissioner Roger Nichols.
Here.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to start with just some announcements. This meeting is being recorded and will be publicly available. All participants via Zoom are asked to please mute yourselves unless you're speaking. Lines providing feedback while not speaking will be muted to ensure others can hear. Only you can unmute yourself using the mic icon, or if you're participating by phone, you can unmute yourself by dialing *6. Participants behaving inappropriately will be promptly removed from the meeting. As chair, I'll specifically invite participants for public comment at the appropriate times, so please be patient and wait to be called on. I do have a list here that Jency just provided, so thank you, Jency. And please refrain from using the comment feature on Zoom unless you're directed to do so by the chair. It will distract from the intended flow of the hearings procedure. All right, at this time, we're going to open it up for public comment, and this is specifically for public comment for items not listed on this agenda today. So things we aren't talking about today. You're welcome to come up and give public comment or unmute your mic if you have a public comment. And again, these are items that are not on the agenda. It doesn't look like we have anyone here in person. I didn't see anybody signed up, and it doesn't look like we have anyone online either. All right. So in that case, we will move on. Next, we are going to work to approve the minutes from the November 5th, 2024 Wasco County Planning Commission hearing. I believe everybody here should have had a chance to an opportunity to review those minutes. And do any of the commissioners have any comments or corrections to those meeting minutes or motions or seconds on those minutes from?
I move acceptance.
I second.
All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Nichols and a second from Commissioner Ashley to approve the meeting minutes from November 5th, 2024. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, motion carries and the minutes are approved. At this time, I'm going to officially open up the hearing. This public hearing is now open for the purpose of the Planning Commission's consideration of land use file number 921-24-000113 PLNG, which is an update to the Wasco County Land Use and Development Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan. So the procedure we're going to follow today is first, we're going to have the Community Development Department staff present their report. Then there'll be an opportunity for the public to testify. Next, the Planning Commission will deliberate and make a recommendation, which will be sent to the Board of County Commissioners. And this hearing is scheduled for 2 hours. We will try to conclude it by 5 p.m. Typically, we limit testimony to about 3 minutes. But I don't know that we have a lot of folks speaking and there's a small enough crowd, we might be able to go up to 5. So we'll see when folks are coming up, but I think 5 minutes will be good. As for how we conduct this hearing, we use the rules of evidence, and the rules of evidence are as follows. No person shall present irrelevant, immaterial, or unduly repetitious testimony or evidence. If you have submitted written comments in advance, please do not restate it in oral testimony unless you have further information to add. Evidence received shall be of a quality that reasonable persons rely upon in the conduct of their daily affairs. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards the criteria applicable to the subject of the hearing, and failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the commission and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes further appeal based on that issue. And so now at this time, I'm going to ask all participants to mute themselves and hold their questions until the end of staff's presentation. And we will go ahead and mute you if we need to. And we'll make sure to hold questions until the end for staff, and staff can go ahead and give us their presentation.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Kelly Housley Glover, Community Development Managing Director. And I have a pretty lengthy presentation. I have sort of grouped it into some buckets, and I'm going to pause in between each buckets to allow for questions, because otherwise you're just going to hear me and Sean talk for 30 minutes. So I'll take some pauses for commissioner questions at that point in time. And so it's probably going to be about 45 to 50 minutes long. Just a little bit of housekeeping for folks who do need to use the facilities. They are down this hallway to the left. So tonight, I'm going to go over some key concepts just to make sure that we are all operating with the same information, foundational information about the updates. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the updates, what the history is of them. I'm going to go through, probably the lengthiest portion is highlighting all the proposed changes. I tried to group those in a way that expedites this process, so I'm not going line by line, but sort of talking about substantively what the issues are. Citizens really appreciate when we highlight what's mandatory versus what's optional, so I have a couple slides that speak to that. I've also provided for the commission a summary of the feedback that we have on the record to date. That's written testimony and then some feedback that we received at the open houses that we have conducted. Finally, I will conclude with the relevant rules governing proceedings. That makes up the bulk of the staff report. But I wanted to make sure citizens are aware of sort of what the relevant rules are governing this proposed update. So I'll pause for any questions before I get into overview. Okay. So the first concept, that is driving the bus in terms of the timeline of this update and is a mandatory update are clear and objective standards. This has to do, there's a long and interesting history. I'm happy to expand on that at length if anybody's interested, but there was some revisions made to the needed housing statute in 2017 that had the effect of changing the language to apply to all of rural Oregon and landed Washington County in some interesting litigation. And in response to that in 2022, a bill was proposed to try to rectify that. There were some amendments, and the long and short of that is clear and objective standards now apply in rural Oregon to rural residentially zoned lands for new residential development. And it's a requirement that basically anytime we're permitting residential development in rural residential lands, we have clear and objective criteria. And what that means is we can't use discretionary. It can't be a staff looks at all the evidence and makes a call. It has to be kind of a pass, fail, yes, no. So I have below a table that demonstrates some examples from our own ordinance about what this looks like. The first is from RR10. Right now, we have criteria that's discretionary that says existing vegetation shall be retained as much as possible. That's calls for a judgment call. So instead, we're proposing to preserve vegetation that's critical for wildlife habitat and other ecological reasons. No more than 5 oaks can be removed. Similarly, in all of our work with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, we've really learned the importance of clustering development, particularly in our resource zones for habitat and other purposes. So you could have a discretionary criteria that says development should be clustered, but what does that mean? That's discretionary again. So instead, what we use and what we're proposing in some of the zones is that development must be sited within 300 feet of the road. Clear, objective. Finally, we have even in one of our non-resource zones, we have this criteria that says residential development cannot impact adjacent farm or forest practices. typically that requires a considerable amount of analysis on the part of staff, called a cumulative impacts test. But again, it requires the discretion of a professional, typically with input from experts. So it's not clear and objective. So in lieu of that, staff is proposing a clear and objective standard, which is development shall be contained within 10% of the parcel. And the idea is the same. It's to protect farm and forest practices, but it's intended to be clear and objective. So that's when we're talking about clear and objective through the staff report, and you're seeing some of those changes. This is really the impetus behind that. The next concept, probably familiar to folks who maybe live urban or have lived urban, accessory dwelling units. Those are sometimes called granny flats, or mother-in-law suites, or mother-in-law apartments, or tiny homes parked next to an existing primary dwelling. The legislature, we anticipated this several years ago. It's gone through a couple iterations with the Oregon legislature. Where we're at today is that they have approved accessory dwelling units only in rural residential zones. And there's very specific language that governs what that means in Wasco County. I've gone into depth in the staff report about that. It is also memorialized in our comprehensive plan in anticipation of that. But there's a whole bunch of criteria that comes with accessory dwelling units. This is all directly from state law. And so it is accessory dwelling units. It's an additional house on rural residential lands, but it is with some strings, pretty strong strings attached. So it's things like can only be 900 square feet, has to be 100 feet from existing family dwelling, can't be used as a short-term rental, has to be within a structural fire protection district. And these are all things that come, again, directly from state law, so they are not variable. These are things that we can create a variance for. And I think that's important for citizens to understand. I wanted to, for the purposes of citizens, and also to remind our planning commission, because I'm assuming you don't stare at our zoning map every day, give you an idea of what rural residential lands, where they are in Wasco County. So this is the north portion of the county. What we're looking at is the yellow. Let's see if it's this color yellow and this color yellow. And then I've got one little slice of R2 down here. So this is R5 and R10. It does exclude the purple, which is FF10. That is not considered a rural residential zone for the purposes of accessory dwelling units. This is Tye Valley. What we're looking at in Tye Valley is this yellow sort of box, hashed out box. And that's Tye Valley residential. In Wamak, it's the yellow spots. And then in Pine Grove, again, we see some R2 and R5 in yellow. So these account for the sum total of rural residentially zoned lands in Wasco County. It's not a huge parcel of land, I think, as most citizens. And the commission is obviously aware most of our land in rural Wasco County is zoned EFU or A1. And Sean is going to take us this part.
Recently, we started to look at possible changes to our accessory structures and our restrictions. Currently, our definition restricts the accessory structure to being less than 75% of the primary use of the property, generally the dwelling. So if you have a 1,000 square foot house, the biggest accessory building you can have is 750 square feet. And for people with smaller houses, this was an issue. When you only have a mobile home or a mini home, your outbuildings are very limited by that. So we started to study other counties and what they had, and we realized, I think we looked at 10 different counties, and none of the other counties actually had the same restriction that we had. And sorry, Sean Bailey, Wasco County Senior Planner for the record. I forgot to do that. So we realized that was sort of a Wasco County special, having the restriction of 75% to the primary use. Most other counties had lot coverage rules, if anything. Most of the things we saw were pertaining directly to ADUs. So we started to come up with what could possibly be our new plan, and this is what we've come up with. And we've now dropped the 75% rule, and on properties that are larger than 20 acres, only 20% of the property may be occupied by accessory structures and buildings. And on properties that are smaller than 2 acres, you can choose one of the options of only 20% may be occupied by the accessory structure, or the footprint of the individual building shall not exceed 150% of the primary structure's footprint. Oop, and sorry, that was 2 and 1 there. You can choose one of those, but we still decided to go with 150% in case you were a very small property. And we also wanted to point out that accessory structures will still be needing to follow property development standards, which are also going to restrict you from encroaching on your neighbor or surrounding farmlands, depending on your surrounding area. So you are already restricted on your property by your property development standards, and this will then also be 20% of your total. And this is just a guide handout of what that might look like. 1 acre is 43,560 square feet. So we've just thrown together a quick table of what that might look like. And I understand, as you look at the left corner, lower left there, if you have 50 acres, 20% of that is 435,000 square feet. So just a reminder on that, we currently have no restrictions to the number of buildings you can have on your property through planning. Building codes and other agencies might. So you would still need to meet our other standards. This doesn't, mean just a generic free for all of you can build 435,000 square feet on ag land if you have 50 acres. You still have to meet the other requirements. It's just showing what that might look like for total.
So we'll pause for questions.
Yeah, thank you. If you can go back to the slide just before this one. I had a kind of a logical, breakdown on this one, because it seems to me like they're missing under the 20% or the 150% a phrase that says, or the smaller of the two, because I can conceive of something that's 140% of a primary structure footprint that's more than 20% of the lot size, depending on the lot size. It seems to me like that's, you could have one, pick the one that would not be as good for the public as the other, depending on that situation. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's an old copy editor kind of thing.
Any other questions?
Yeah. I was waiting to see if you were going to answer that before I asked. I had a question, Kelly. There's RR zoned land just outside of Mosier, and I didn't see it on your slide. Is
Did I
that
cut
it
it-
all the
did I
way to
cut
the
it out?
upper left?
Did I cut it out or something?
Well, it's like along just to the west of State Road, for example, is embedded in FF10 land, but it's RR5, for
It's
example.
this,
Is-
Commissioner, is it this area right here?
It could be, yeah. I just wasn't sure from the scale. Okay. Because you had a breakout of the others, Wamick, Pine Grove, etc. And so I just wasn't sure if that was the Mosier piece.
Yeah, so in this portion of the county, it's this canary yellow and this big bird yellow. And then there's a tiny little piece down here that's R2, which is a little bit lighter than canary.
And then the purple would be FF10.
FF10, correct.
Okay, thank you.
On the property like less than 2 acres, the applicant gets a choice of either 20% of the lot area for accessory buildings or 150% of the houses footprint.
I
I
believe,
can't hear anymore. Is it just me or?
So the way I read this or understand this, an applicant on option B has, if you have less than 2 acres, you can have no more than 20%. So you could have up to 20% of your lot. Let's say you had 1.9 acres or whatever. You could have 20% of your acreage in accessory buildings, or you get a choice. You can have up to 150% of your primary structure's building footprint. Am I understanding that correctly?
They may select. Yes, that's correct, Commissioner.
So someone could either have, like on 1.9 acres, they could have 16,553 square feet in accessory buildings, or they could have, if, let's say they had a 2,800 square foot house, they could have up to 4,200 square feet if it was all on one level. So why would someone pick the lesser of those two?
that would be up to the land.
I mean, do they get a choice? They
Yeah,
can-
our language is they do get to choose whatever they might work better for their property. Not everyone has the larger house, so depends on that. Like that would be a major factor for people who have the less than 2 acres will be their dwelling size.
It's the reason this works because also, even if it's 100, it can be 148% of the original structure, but it still has to be under 850 square feet. Is that why that still works? Or no? So you can have an accessory that's built bigger than the primary, okay.
Yeah. And so that might be great. You'll hear some feedback from citizens who have some concerns about the accessory structure as drafted. So this would be a really good area for Planning Commission to deliberate and give us direction on.
Yeah.
We'd really appreciate that, because this is new to us too.
Okay.
Okay, so are there any other questions about the key concepts before I move on the background? I appreciate all that feedback and questions. Okay, so I wanted to give some background about the updates. I did include in your packet, staff and myself worked to do an update to our 2009 buildable lands study that looks specifically at non-resource land to kind of see what we have available for development or redevelopment. This coincides with a statewide analysis, the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, and also a recent population forecast that we get every couple years from the Portland State University's Population Center for Research. That's the official state population arm. Based on that analysis, we have determined that we need 229 new homes by 2044. The statewide analysis has us considerably higher at 620 homes. And for those citizens or commissioners that are interested in, we go into more detail in the housing needs analysis. It's not a giant housing needs analysis compared with urban jurisdictions, but it does give you a good flavor of what the data is showing. And we anticipated this based on conversations that we were having during the comprehensive plan update. So have been working on this issue for a number of years. Our analysis showed a shortfall of 24 lots for 20 years if no new lots are created. If we factor non-resource and non-rural residential lands, we do have a surplus of 172 lots, but one of the reasons I went through the exercise of a housing needs analysis is that I thought it was really important to share with citizens and also the state that our department is actively aware of constraints that do impact the buildability of lands. This includes, obviously, this commission has had conversations about the new biological opinion rules with respect to FEMA that could seriously constrain development, particularly in our rural service centers like Ty Valley. We are aware of infrastructure constraints, and I've highlighted that in a couple different areas with respect to accessory dwelling units, because I want citizens to be aware that even if the accessory dwelling units pass, there are going to be pretty significant costs for development based on septic systems. We're also aware of a variety of other factors that have an impact on the buildability of lots, and something that we don't see in urban jurisdictions, but we tend to see more in rural jurisdictions, is that regardless of zoning, we do have a lot of public lands in rural Oregon, and we also have a lot of lands that are held in conservation easements or owned by a variety of organizations, land trusts, churches, other philanthropic organizations, that where their main goal may be conservation, but it may be for some intended future development. So it's really important when we can do an analysis of land available for development that we consider those factors. And I encourage folks to read that analysis if they're interested. So I've alluded a few times to some intensive work that this body did and staff did in updating our comprehensive plan. That was a 5-year project where we did a lot of citizen involvement. We went all over the county several times a year. Housing was one of sort of a separate and distinct topic because, again, we were aware that this was an issue, and we wanted to think about ways we could address it with the constraints in rural land use regulations. So you'll see that we were anticipating the accessory dwelling unit provisions and put that into the comprehensive plan so that it was clear in case existing staff moved on or commissioners moved on. And so that's down in here in 10.1.2, where it talks about if the state law changes, this is what citizens wanted to see, is us pursue accessory dwelling units. We were very careful to make sure that it reflected rural residential, so there would be no surprises on the part of citizens about where this would occur. We also anticipated issues with wells and septic that is written into the state law. And we know citizens, something we heard during the comprehensive plan update across topics was conflict with the transportation system. So, and I believe some of that's in citizen testimony. Also, another thing that staff identified that we talked to citizens about was we have in several zones prohibitions against single wide mobile homes. And it's not unusual to Wasco County. It was sort of pervasive in the 80s and early 90s for jurisdictions to try to limit single wide mobile homes. We've always allowed them in agricultural zones, and that makes sense. But in our more rural residential zones, folks didn't like the look of them, essentially. So, but we're aware that may be an affordable option for some households. So we explored that with citizens. What we heard was, that sounds great, but what we're concerned about is manufacture date and specifically roof pitch. And I think what I heard and what the sentiment was they were concerned about flat roofs suffering snow load and then collapsing and becoming a blight. And similarly with manufacture date is, boy, you can get a hot deal on a 50s single wide, but pretty hard to make look nice. And so staff, I'll talk about it in a little bit, but that was the impetus behind the roof pitch and manufacture date language in chapter 4, was really to address citizen concerns, but then open up many of our zones to allow single wide mobile homes as a new opportunity for affordable housing in some of our residential lands. I've talked a little bit about some of the clear and objective history. Wanted to highlight that our work today is funded in part by a grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development. We are part of 4 counties that received a grant to pursue clear and objective standards. So we are one of the front runners. We're the smallest county to be undertaking this work. And I'm particularly proud of the work that we've done. We've worked in concert with those larger jurisdictions and our partners, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and others, to do as effective job as possible. And we are required to codify that by July 1st of this year. There is some talk about an extension being bootstrapped to one of the governor's bills, and I don't have updates on that to date. We're still looking to see if that happens. In concert with the clear and objective standards, the legislature passed last year a whole series of rural advisory committees for some updates to our land use program. There was Eastern Oregon solar siting standards, Goal 5 cultural areas, which I participated in, and then this farm and forest updates. The main thrust of that was to codify case law and make sure that all jurisdictions were aware of what the courts had determined with respect to some of our farm and forest programs. We've done a really good job at trying to keep abreast and keep our code fresh. And you'll remember a few years ago, we did update our EFU, our A1 chapter. But there were a few minor changes that we needed to update, specifically a couple references, and then being specific about IRS documentation required for farm dwellings, and that's to prove income. So I'll pause there. That's the background on the updates. We've got a few things that, again, arose out of really great community conversations over a number of years, and a few things that are required by state law. Any questions from the commission at this time?
Yeah, sorry. I was reading through it and it says an accessory dwelling structure, regardless of size, is by default considered a 2-bedroom unit. Is that a state regulation?
That's a DEQ standard.
Okay, all right, because it just seems kind of crazy to me. It should
It's a
be
DEQ
appropriate to the size, I would guess.
It's a DEQ standard. Daniel and I met with our local environmental health services to discuss accessory dwelling units, because again, we want to be very transparent to citizens about the potential of this. And the biggest red flag we have is that, yes, accessory dwelling units, like regardless, even if it's like a 300 square foot park model, they're wanting to establish as an accessory dwelling unit. DEQ considers it a 2-bedroom. And for most folks in this room, they probably are aware septics, the size of a septic is determined on bedroom, not on the number of toilets.
Yes.
And I would assume most citizens have not overbuilt their septic when they placed it for their home,
Yeah.
which means if you have a lovely 3-bedroom home and you want to put in an accessory dwelling unit, your septic's probably only rated for 3 bedrooms.
Right.
So you will need to modify or replace, which could be very, very costly, especially depending on the size of your parcel.
And as you pointed out, this is not generally conducive for households with the greatest need for that.
That is a big concern for me, Commissioner, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I go on? Okay. So I'm going to highlight the proposed changes by chapter. Again, this is the lengthiest part of the presentation. Chapter 1, that's our definitions section. Most of these new definitions are to operationalize the new concepts or criteria. So we have to put these definitions in place in order to make the other parts go. And in some cases, we did receive feedback from the state that we needed to make some definitions. So that's pretty self-explanatory. It's generally, these things are mandatory. Chapter 3, for folks who are not aware, that's our big workhorse chapter. It contains all of our zones and overlay zones in Wasco County. So I've tried to, again, group these things in ways that make sense. Here's sort of generally what we're seeing. We are proposing, obviously, a way more permissive standard for accessory structures. That's based on citizen feedback. I want to be clear that that is not agricultural buildings. Agricultural buildings, whole different ball of wax. They've always had a lot more permissive standard, a different process for permitting. This is really for non-farm or forest accessory buildings. We are proposing something kind of odd, but we did some research and the board is getting ready tomorrow to start repeal of the ag mediation ordinance. Before, state law had this farm forest acknowledgement program that basically you put with your deed that says, I'm not going to sue my neighbor for forest farm practices. We didn't have that. And so Wasco County had adopted this ag mediation ordinance that said, before you go sue, we're going to help facilitate with a mediation group. And so we passed an ordinance. We have a reference. Staff for any permit attaches some information relevant to that. It's redundant. It's not relevant. So we're proposing to remove that reference. As I mentioned, the state is requiring us to require IRS documentation for farm dwellings. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's typically what we have historically required anyway, because it's a good way for us to evaluate and demonstrate income related to farm production. Recognizing childcare is also in sort of a crisis state in the state, in the nation, and that there's a substantial push statewide to allow more flexibility with childcare. We are proposing to add it in as a use in all non-resource zones. We have more flexibility with non-resource zones. Resource zones are very prescriptive according to state law, so we don't have that flexibility to do that. We've also added references to our temporary uses in all of our zones. I think that was just an oversight on the part of past staff. Staff knew intuitively to jump to chapter 8 where our temporary uses are, but that can be more difficult for newer staff, but also citizens who don't know how to read these giant mammoth books of code. So we want to make sure it's really obvious that temporary uses are eligible in zones. And that's really important for particularly temporary medical hardships. So that is a second dwelling that most zones allow if you're needing care for somebody who's elderly or infirmed. In chapter 3, the clear and objective standards, they're a little bit different per zone. So I've split this up into zone. FF10, we didn't have to do this in FF10. Again, these standards are only required in rural residential. But Daniel and I have been talking for several years about modifying FF10 to make it easier for folks to site a home, because it is largely intended to be a residential and sort of transitional zone. So we thought it was appropriate to make this shift at this time. We are proposing for new homes in conjunction with a resource use. So if that's a farm and forest use, to make that a type 1 instead of a type 2. A type 1 means that it's a ministerial application. So it is clear and objective. It's a kind of a zoning clearance. This is a under $500 permit that typically takes staff 2 weeks to a month, provided there are no issues with the application. So we think this is a really good change for residents to help expedite siting homes. We've always distinguished resource homes and non-resource homes in this zone. So we've kept that consistent. What we're proposing for new homes not in conjunction with resource is to make those a type 2 instead of a type 3. Type 3 is our conditional use permits. And as this commission is well aware, that comes with all sorts of discretionary criteria and all sorts of analysis. So we're really sticking to just some standards that are a little bit more aggressive than our type 1, but still should expedite the process. And this is where our clustering and considerations about Oregon white oak are put into place. FF10, we have some unique areas in the county where we have proliferation of Oregon white oak, and that is understood to be a really important habitat for a number of species. And so we've worked in concert with ODF and W to really understand how to best operationalize that. I want to make sure that citizens and the commission are aware that if you can't meet any of those clear and objective standards, that you can still do the discretionary path. And that would have you having to meet some more discretionary type criteria, but you do have the option to, if you need to remove some Oregon white oak, you would be able to work one-on-one with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife staff to kind of determine how to best go about that. So if anything, we're protecting the status quo, but really trying to make the process in FF10 easier. For agricultural recreation, AR, RR5, RR2, WAM R2, WAM R5, new homes are still a type 1. Nothing has changed. It's still a pretty easy over the, a 2 weeks to a month under $500 application. RR10, which is, you'll remember from the maps, mostly in the north portion of the county. And from best I could tell, we had a lot of scenic standards that were likely carryover from before the National Scenic Act, when this zone was really doing double duty of preserving some of our national scenic area resources. So a whole bunch of scenic standards that are not clear and objective. We are proposing to remove those. Making new homes a type 1 if, again, no Oregon white oak is removed. And then if folks need to remove some Oregon white oak, there's a type 2 discretionary path available that again would have them working with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. As far as other housing that we needed to put the clear and objective lens on, we have in all of our industrial zones, so that's that list there. We have watch persons quarters. That's if you have an industrial use and you want somebody to be on site to kind of watch the materials, the building. Trying to think whatever the application is. I think we have a few of these in the county, mostly in the middle belt of the county. We did need to make those criteria clear and objective. So and basically the point of that is to make sure this use is consistent with the industrial use. So that if the industrial use necessitating the watch person goes away, somebody's not just living there long-term and then sort of not encouraging the industrial use to happen. So that's the purpose of that. Finally, in Tide Valley, we do have some opportunities for multifamily residential development. But they were a type 3, so again, a conditional use. We've moved that to a type 2. However, we're aware of some infrastructure needs. And that's generally the way it is in Tide Valley. So we've just proposed some standards to make that consistent. I'm going to pause here and then turn it over to staff to talk about OZ2. But are there any questions about that portion of chapter 3?
On the industrial watchman, are you monitoring? I think that was originally developed for the marijuana grow more than anything, wasn't it?
No, marijuana, according to state law, marijuana is not entitled to any type of housing.
But they did have watchmen's quarters at their gates. Those were illegal then?
That
Okay.
would be unpermitted. No, this has been in our ordinance, as far as I can tell, from at least the 70s.
Okay.
Any other questions before we move on to the overlay zones?
I'll go ahead and take this. Daniel Doherty, Wasco County Planning Director. So roughly 5 years ago, as our then 2019 Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan was finally approved and codified, we had an action item, actually 2 action items within it, asking or pushing us towards updated overlay zone 2 or our landslide hazards code. So we began to pursue that action item along with updating our landslide hazard maps. So today I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about the code portion of that. So we're proposing updating our existing landslide hazards overlay zone 2 code. So briefly, the current overlay zone essentially requires any development within a landslide hazards area to be reviewed as a discretionary review. And it also requires a geohazard study. So it doesn't really matter what structure is proposed. It could be a small 200 square foot structure, 10 feet high. The individual or landowner applicant has to obtain a geohazards report, essentially. So we've received feedback for years now from the public, asking if there's any way, of course, to modify this, the existing code, to allow a little bit more flexibility in the code. And as Kelly mentioned, we also have to update according to clear and objective standards, specifically in our residential zones. And a lot of the current landslide hazards are mapped in residential areas. So over the last few years, we've updated this code to reflect both the needs and desires of the public, as well as still trying to ensure the health, safety, welfare of the public. And so I think we've come up with a pretty good path forward. So the proposed overlay zone code is non-discretionary. And it's non-discretionary for both residential uses, for industrial uses, commercial uses, as well as accessory structure uses. The big difference is that with accessory and agricultural structures, you essentially have what we call a self-certification form. So the applicant will self-certify that they intend on following a number of existing standards that exist right now in our code. Those standards are oriented along the lines of development standards, which require revegetation of the construction site, those kinds of things, as well as requiring those structures to be removed from extreme slopes. Any other development will still be reviewed as a type 1 ministerial, but will be required to get a geologic hazards survey done. So in both cases, the land use review itself is still a ministerial review. So less expensive, less time consuming, but in the case of residential uses, industrial uses, commercial uses, etc., they're still going to have to get a geologic hazards survey and then self-certify that the construction of such structures will follow the recommendations within that survey. So in a nutshell, less expensive, less time consuming for folks that are seeking an accessory structure or agricultural structures. Still less expensive on the permitting side for those residential, commercial, industrial uses, but still meeting that health, safety, welfare guideline of requiring a geological hazard survey from an engineer, certified engineer. So, and then I'll open it up for questions before we move on. Any questions? Okay.
Thanks, Daniel.
All right.
Daniel's done an exceptional job with this chapter, and we think it'll be a model for other jurisdictions that are looking for clear and objective standards. So I think it's just an example of amazing work that our staff does. The reason Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is graciously agreed to come tonight to answer any specific questions relevant to species. And I apologize, in the cover sheet, I thought I had removed OZ6 and OZ10. They snuck it in that version. I was able to eliminate those. So these are the other overlay zones that we proposed changes to. Overlay zone 7, for those of you who don't memorize these by heart, is Oregon Scenic Waterways, or Wild and Scenic River, which is White River, and then Oregon Scenic, natural areas. And so there's natural areas are sort of a unique list of things that's maintained by Orbic. They're sprinkled throughout the county. What I have proposed, this has been a bear of an overlay zone. You will remember we agonized about this during the comprehensive plan update because there had been some back and forth between the planning commission and the board and the history about interpretation. We made everything a conditional use permit a few years ago. And of course, now with clear and objective, we needed to figure out a pathway forward for rural residential zones. I did an analysis with our fantastic geographic information systems department. We only have a few rural residential parcels that fall in this zone, and they're all in Tide Valley, and they all have existing development. So I tried to work based on, my knowledge about what we're trying to preserve, tried to develop clear and objective standards. And so the first is very similar to what we already do for riparian areas, which is have 100-foot setback from the ordinary high water mark. And that just makes sure that things are removed, they're not visible. This doesn't negate folks' need to also work with the Oregon Parks and Recreation, who manages all of our Oregon Scenic Waterways and Wild and Scenic River, but they would need to be 100 feet. None of these sites are within a natural area site, but in case the zoning maps change at some point in time, also have this criteria that they need to be 200 feet from a natural area site. Again, that's just to create some distance and protect those resources in their natural state. As I mentioned, these parcels existing now all have dwellings on them. So wanted to make sure the dwellings are replaced in the existing footprint, but recognizing that may not work for some residents, we have opened up that discretionary pathway. So if you can't meet any of these standards, you can still go through the discretionary pathway to analyze sort of your impact in this zone. And just a reminder again, everything that falls within OZ7 right now is essentially a conditional use permit.
Right.
OZ8, those of you who were on the commission several years ago, remember the work that we did with overlay zone 8. That's our deer and elk winter range. It's a sensitive wildlife is what it's called. We have had a great partnership with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife over the years, really rely on our regional wildlife biologists, including Andrew, and then our state partners. So we had to, of course, go back into this section and think about clear and objective. And you'll see, once again, oak trees making a prominent place, really important habitat for our deer and elk, also some other critters. And what we want to protect here is the old growth. So that's why you have the diameter breast height. That's the size of the tree. They're also suggesting that we don't see any development between December and March, December and March. I don't think that's a real hardship for residents because our ground is typically pretty frozen and we don't see a lot of development anyway. But if you can't meet these standards, you need to remove more than 5 oaks, or gosh darn it, it's a mild winter and you need to break ground in January. We do have that discretionary pathway still available for citizens. Finally, 12 is our sensitive birds. So that's our raptor species, our owls. These occur mostly in forested areas, along rivers. They're not in prime development sites, but we do have buffers around them that are species dependent. And the ticklish thing about the sensitive birds, OZ12, is that it's confidential. We can't, we are required not to reveal the location of those sites to even the property owner. And I think the thinking is that if folks knew, they'd just go down and buzzsaw the tree and risk the habitat. So OZ13 is our western pond turtles. That also creates buffers around the turtles. It's already been pretty prohibitive in terms of building within the buffer zone, and so is 12. Generally, we really try to discourage development within that buffer. So what we're doing is maintaining the discretionary path, but really trying to discourage development happening adjacent to where those critters live. Okay. I'm moving on to the accessory dwelling unit portion. I can pause if there's any questions about the overlay zones or keep going.
I have a few. I think you lost me at natural areas. I don't think I quite understood. Aren't areas, all areas natural?
No,
And there's a kind of special definition that I'm not tracking on.
I can look in our comprehensive plan what the official definition is. I've got it here. It's a very specific prescriptive list that was developed like in the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
In part in concert with the Nature Conservancy, and it's areas of unique natural beauty, significance, different than a cultural site.
Okay. It's cultural, I understand. That's where artifacts are potentially found. Yeah.
Let's see if I've got the inventory here. Did you have another question while I look?
Yeah, there was one. I lost it.
I've just seen it.
And I'm hoping that there's specific definitions, so an area of particular beauty somebody might like scabland and somebody else doesn't, and who judges which is what? Yeah, where the objective standards.
Commissioner Daniel Doherty again. I've got the comp plan up and it just says natural areas, land areas reserved from development or modification for the protection of animal species and other natural areas as identified in the Wasco County Comprehensive Plan. And this, I think, is what
Yeah, we have an inventory. of
Ellie
it.
was getting the inventory, and that inventory has been codified within the comp plan.
Okay.
Thanks, Daniel, appreciate that. It's a Goal 5 protected resource. So we have to go through an inventory process and either an ESEE or a safe harbor approach. And we have 5 sites in Wasco County.
Okay.
They are Cedar Island, Sharps Island, Fall Creek Island, the Underhill site, and Postage Stamp Lookout.
Postage stamps up above Ty Valley.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. That's helpful. 3 of them are islands. Okay, I got that. Those are usually unique. So thanks.
So River Island has a distinct population of incense cedars. Sharps and Fall Creek have great blue heron rookeries. Underhill site is an environmental education site for children. There are natural vegetation, habitats, trails, and historic sites preserved by the USFS. And then Postage Stamp is owned by the state of Oregon, and that's a laboratory research site. These are all either federally or state-owned sites, which is why I said, it's sort of iffy putting it in the ordinance, but in case something were to dramatically change, like the feds decided to divest their portfolio and we were to put a residential zone, we would want to have protections for those sites.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Okay, so moving on to accessory dwelling units, I've probably, everybody's really clear now why it's these zones. Again, rural residential designated zones. We did ask the question, of citizens and wanted some feedback. We did receive a little bit of feedback about, do we want to see it in R2 or do we want to go up in R5? That was in recognition of the septic issue. But we've left that up to the discretion of the planning commission. Two, we had, this is the mobile homes. We had, again, not unilaterally did we have a prohibition against single wide mobile homes. It was in these zones. So AR, that's most of Pine Hollow and also the Washington Family Ranch is AR. R5, R2, Wamak R2 and Wamak R5. And so again, this is what the language looks like. It said at least 18 feet wide. We're proposing to strike that out and then make sure people follow those supplemental provisions about manufacture date and roof pitch. We looked at a cross-section of other ordinances statewide to determine what our partners use as kind of like a best practice. And generally, it's 15 or 20 years. Those were kind of the manufacture date. And I'll go into public feedback about these when we asked citizens at our open houses what they felt, but that's what we're proposing. I think we are agnostic about those numbers. If the commission thinks 25 is more reasonable, I think we're happy to craft language in support of that. We are also requiring that it's consistent with the manufactured housing and construction standards. That happens at building codes, but it's just a nice heads up to citizens to be transparent about the process. And then again, I talked a little bit about snow load and roof pitch. Again, did a cross-section analysis of other codes. Some people use the minimum of 2/12 and some use 3/12. And I have a little handy picture for those of you who are not master builders and don't know what that means, to kind of show that it's not much of a pitch, but it's something that could theoretically help snow. The other part of chapter 4 that is getting updated is this is all the accessory dwelling unit language. I had to make some revisions, so it wasn't directly copy paste from state law because you will see DLCD flagged. This is also subject to clear and objective standards. The one area again where we wanted citizen feedback was the state says we can do it on 2 acres or greater. We threw it out there. Do you want to see us do it 5 acres or greater? We could be, of course, more restrictive than state law, not less restrictive. So, again, it's something to ponder based on citizen input that you have in your packet and may hear today. But everything else from state law and not variable. So chapter 8. This is the final chapter to cover in our ordinance tonight. The biggest update, this is our temporary update, is that a new state law was passed to allow a longer term use of a mobile home. So it's an RV, residential trailer, or manufactured home after a hazard event. So if your home was unfortunately destroyed by wildfire, you would be able to site an RV or a manufactured home there for up to 5 years. Generally, our TUPs or RVs are only for a couple of years. So we, of course, are thankful year after year, even in big fire years, that we don't see a lot of primary structure damage. But we do, I think this is a good law to help people in the event that the worst happens. So comprehensive plan update. I just had to go into our chapter 5, which is our goal 5 chapter, to update the ESEE analysis. That's those inventories, and it kind of guides us with criteria, and that's to make sure that it operationalizes those clear and objective pathways. So not a huge, it's sort of more of a technical fix. I don't expect it's probably super accessible to most people reading these documents, but DLCD informed us that we did need to make sure we were crossing this T. I'm going to pause there before I get into mandatory and optional and see if there are any questions about those remaining chapter updates. You all are being very good sports about this very long presentation. Okay, so I'll try to chew through this a little bit quicker. Like I said, citizens like to know mandatory versus optional. That's why we underscore optional with a big squiggly underline. But I thought it would be helpful to see it here in black and white. So mandatory, clear and objective standards. I've talked about some definitions are necessary. That farm dwelling IRS documentation and some of our cross references, those are all mandatory. So if all you wanted to do is touch the mandatory stuff, that's what we would be talking about today. Optional is this accessory structure size proposal. If you're like, we don't like this proposal, we think it needs more work, you can throw it out and we can come back to it at a later date. Childcare facilities, same thing. If you're like, meh, I don't know how I feel about that, we can throw it out. I've also added in a few zones based on some feedback from the Public Works Director, a road disclosure agreement. We do it in one zone and not in another, and we just wanted to add it for consistency. And really what this is kind of an FYI to residents to know who maybe are new to living rural, that not every road is maintained or plowed and it's just a heads up. So it's not a new rule so much as a FYI. Other optional updates, and then I've got, if we go with these updates, this is going to be required. So if we go with accessory dwelling units, again, that's optional. We need to adopt those definitions, and we need to adopt those standards in chapter 4. And I will need feedback today from the Planning Commission, what you want to recommend to the board, 2-acre or 5-acre. Also optional is this removal of size limits on mobile homes. It's up to you. We've heard it loud and clear from citizens. Again, we talked about these issues with citizens, but if you've, a few years have passed, you've changed your mind. We don't need to pass it. Is it required to do manufactured date and roof pitch? No, but we did make a promise to citizens that we would evaluate that. So today we will need to have the Planning Commission come to terms with 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, and then what roof pitch you want to go with. I'm going to chew through these kind of quickly. So I wanted to make sure you're all aware of the public involvement we did for this process. We had 2 virtual events, kind of Ask a Planner, where folks could send us questions in advance or log on and ask us questions. We had one in November and one in March. The idea in November, we had kind of first drafts, first blush, and wanted to get folks thinking about these ideas. We always try to give citizens December and January off in recognition of the weather and holiday season. We had 3 in-person houses, again, one in November and then 2 a few weeks ago, one in Ty Valley and one here in the Dalles. Those were nicely attended. We had some great one-on-one conversations. We did them open house style so that planners, staff here was able to sit one-on-one with citizens and really talk through their questions and concerns. And it was interesting. I think the Dalles folks loved it. Ty Valley was kind of confused by it, but we, at the end of the day, had great conversations with citizens and had a total of 47 participants at all these. So didn't blow some of our records from the comprehensive plan update, but it certainly was a nice level of attendance that we really, really appreciate, and appreciate folks being here tonight and listening. Means a lot to us to see engagement. Of course, we do a mailed notice. We're required by law to do that. So we sent that out to over 4,000 property owners. And we have some timelines about when we have to do that. The reason we had the open houses in March was we wanted to get that notice out to get maximum participation. I've been maintaining an email subscription list. since the comp plan update, we have 155 subscribers. We send emails to those folks to let them know what's going on. And we also do social media posts and post it on the county website as well as the project website. Okay, now I'm going to summarize the feedback that's in the record. And we will, of course, look forward to testimony from folks on the call here or here in the room tonight. So we did hear some concerns about accessory dwelling units. Folks were concerned about increased wildfire risk, strain on groundwater resources. These are not surprise for those of you who went through the comp plan. That's what we heard all over up and down the county. Increased impacts to infrastructure, including roads, and somebody just boldly said, do not allow an RR2. So I think we anticipated some of that, and I don't think we're surprised by that feedback, but it is definitely something we want the Planning Commission to consider tonight. We also heard from a resident some questions about the accessory structure proposal, and I've heard some of that reiterated by Commission tonight. They really felt that accessory structure should be tied to the primary dwelling and should be subordinate. So maybe not 75%, but maybe 99%. They also were very concerned about the proliferation of accessory structures and how that could impact property values. I think Sean reminded folks, but I think it's worth reiteration. We currently do not restrict the number of accessory structures that a property may have, only the size. So I think that's important to underscore for folks. I did get one letter in support of accessory dwelling units. They said they thought this could provide more housing opportunities and allow for long-term family care. I want to make sure that residents and property owners are aware that most of our zones do allow for temporary medical hardships. It's a pretty easy permit for us. You can place a manufactured home or an RV to help somebody who's elderly and infirmed. We can do that right now. Staff's happy to talk to you about that. So know that if you're in a situation where you're needing to care for a family member or move on site to care for a family member, we already do have a pathway to do that. I think folks forget about that, but they were seeing as accessory dwelling units as another opportunity. Open house feedback, in addition to sitting one-on-one with folks and hearing their questions and concerns, we had a couple poster boards and with some dot exercises. Participants were split on 15 or 20 years right down the middle. So sorry, Planning Commission, I tried to get you, some more convincing testimony, but folks were split. They had mixed feelings about that. And I didn't have anybody write in. Sometimes folks will write in and say, oh no, 30 years. Nobody did that. So there was a clear preference, however, for 3 by 12 roof pitch. Folks, I think felt 2 by 12 was too short. And then at all those open houses, what we heard was folks wanted to see ADUs everywhere they could see them. So at the 2 acres. I'm going to conclude and thank you all for being so patient through this monster presentation. I'm just making sure that folks are aware of what the rules are that govern this legislative process. In our Chapter 9, that governs legislative rulemaking for Wasco County, consistent with Oregon state law. We have a whole bunch of references to the Oregon revised statutes. Some of them deal with clear and objective standards. Some of them are related to the post-acknowledgement plan process. That's a process by which we do legislative updates. So not a lot of other criteria available for folks, but it is in the staff report if folks are interested in how staff is addressing that criteria. And with that, I am done with my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions from the commission at this time.
Go ahead.
Back to the accessory structures, which are, per the definition, supposed to be incidental to the principal use. On option B, where you can have, deals with the footprint of individual accessory buildings. So does that mean that each building can be 150% of the primary structure if you're going to have multiple accessory buildings? Or is that a total of all accessory buildings shall not exceed 150%?
That would be with each application. They would still be restricted by their property development standards. But that would be per application. So if they have one large accessory structure in their house, it would be difficult to also get another large accessory structure of equal size if you're under 2 acres. Cause you gotta think septic and other factors do play into your placement as well as topography of your land. But yes, that would be on a application per application basis.
And the 20% is restricted to all accessory structures. So the 150 sort of is I think, a loophole on the number of structures, but 20%, it actually says no more than 20% may be occupied by accessory structures or buildings. So that's a cap.
Mhm.
If that makes sense.
And if somebody has a couple acres and they have over 17,000 square feet in accessory structures, how is that viewed as incidental to the principal? I mean, if the principal structure is 2,500 square feet, but you can have 17,424 square feet of accessory buildings, is that deemed incidental to the principal use?
Commissioner, Daniel Doherty
Yeah.
again. So it wouldn't be 17,424 square feet because we'd have to consider their dwelling unit, which would take up X amount of, square footage. So it would depend on, of course, the size. So let's just say we're dealing with a 4,000 square foot, dwelling footprint.
Mhm.
So that's gonna take that, it's slide 9. So that's gonna take some of that acreage out. Then, of course, it depends on the zone. So in A1160, which there are a lot of smaller A1160 properties that were created in the 80s and in the 70s, you have a 200 foot setback. In, I think, many cases, most cases. So you have to consider the setback as well. So that's going to eat up that 17,000 square feet more of that, right? You also have to consider, as Sean pointed out, septic. So there are certain septic setbacks. So the quick converter is just kind of a very quick converter. However, it is on the burden of the applicant to demonstrate that it's incidental and subordinate. And so if it is incidental and subordinate to the primary use and or in many cases, specifically with EFU A1160 zone, the primary dwelling unit. So it would really, it's very circumstantial depending upon the property as well as the applicant and how they demonstrate an incidental and subordinate. So
Well, the other thought I had in question is that given the various districts and the lot sizes, that, many of these lots, like 2-acre lots, would be non-conforming lots of record. And so are we then increasing the non-conforming, or let's say it's a non-conforming use on that site? Would we be increasing the nonconformity by allowing large amounts of accessory structures?
that's an interesting hypothetical. So if there is a non-conforming use, and let's just say it's a residential use in this case, because it makes it a little bit easier. And the individual seeks a new accessory structure. The new accessory structure would not be increasing the existing non-conforming use of the existing dwelling. Let's say the dwelling was placed in the the 1960s. So it was placed long before current permitting. And the primary use of the zone is agriculture. So it's not for residential use. So it is in fact a legal non-conforming residential use, and the individual wishes to have a current legal accessory structure, it would not be increasing the existing non-conforming use of that property. So. And with regards to a lot of your non-conforming residential zoned lots or AR, agricultural recreation lots, in many cases, they're going to be limited to, again, the set size of the lot, septic setbacks, existing property line development setbacks. It could be our wetland buffers, so streams, rivers. So they're going to be limited in a lot of different ways, but I just want to make sure, because the quick converter just kind of gives you a quick snapshot, but it is just a raw number. So,
Mhm.
and right now, as Sean pointed out, there are no limits to how many accessory structures you could get. So exactly, but they're still limited according to existing property development standards. So you may be able to, in theory, get 5, 10 accessory structures to your one residential use, your one dwelling, but you're still limited to other property development standards. And the reason why the 150% was added to those lots that were 2 acres or less is because you do get into those strange sizes where 20% of the lot would seriously limit somebody to the point where they could only have potentially a 300 square foot accessory structure. So we wanted to make sure we gave folks the ability to get a larger accessory structure. So
If someone came in and applied for an accessory structure at the 150%, and then they came back a year later and wanted to apply for another accessory structure, could they then revert to the 20%?
They could. I mean, if they wanted to go to the 20%, I don't necessarily know if they would want to. It depends on the property size. But in theory, they could. The 150% isn't limited to one structure. You can continuously, but again, that you're still talking about all of the property development standards that apply to it. Building codes has, I believe, setback standards. I don't want to be quoted, but roughly 5 feet. So you have septic standards, property setback standards that would limit that pocket to where you could actually develop. So, and in limiting the pocket, it's going to limit the overall size of your accessory structure. So.
Thank you.
Other questions? How about on Zoom? Any questions, Russ, or sorry, Commissioner Hargrave or Commissioner Davis?
Sorry, trying to figure the technology out here. I don't have any questions at this time. Are we in discussion or just asking questions?
This is just a question for staff right now. Then we're going to open it up to public participation. And then once we get into the deliberation, we can discuss more as a commission at that point.
Thanks, Marcus. The presentations was excellent, and I don't have any further questions at this time. Thanks.
Great. Okay, at this time, staff has compiled a list of those who registered comments. Based on what was provided for me, I think folks online, it does not look like anybody is. Well, there is one person, Sheila Dooley, I believe, is planning to testify. Sheila, are you there? And would you like to offer testimony at this time? And given
Sure.
where we're at time wise, I will just ask folks to keep it at 3 minutes.
Sure. Okay. Sheila Dooley, 3300 Bensel Road, Mosier. Thank you for this opportunity to comment. I'd like to make a few comments regarding the accessory dwelling units. In regards to short-term rentals, there's a real need for more housing. I mean, there are people that buy second homes and investment properties to rent out as short-term rentals. And ADUs are not supposed to be used as short-term rentals, and this is addressed through a deed restriction. I think it's hard to control these rentals if they aren't advertised. Hood River Valley has a problem with returning short-term renters year after year with no advertising locally. And then I have a concern with the fire accessory dwelling units and fire risk and the increased fire risk. But actually both defensible space and home hardening are addressed in chapter 4, section 4.135. If in the wildlife land urban interface, the ADU is required to meet minimal defensible space requirements. If in a high wildfire hazard zone, it has to meet construction provisions for wildfire mitigation. There is a need for education, especially if the primary dwelling and the ADU are both renter occupied. Renters may not be aware of burn bans. Likewise, some of the homes may be second homes with owners who are also not aware of burning restrictions. There have been issues with people burning campfires on weekends and leaving them still burning. On our road, we had someone who did brush burning and left thinking the fires were out. The next day, we saw smoke and the Mosier Fire District responded. The Wildfire Defense Grant includes funding for community education and defensible space work with 2 education events per year. Since this is federal funding, its future may be uncertain. Education could include information on community fire-wise groups where neighbors work together to reduce wildfire risk. For these groups to be successful, they need someone in the group to take charge and keep everyone on track, doing defensible space work and home hardening and getting educated annually. There's a potential for a maximum of 1,051 ADUs in Wasco County. Septic and other requirements make the actual estimated number much lower. Okay, in regards to water, the Mosier Watershed Council is not concerned with ADUs. At a recent meeting, one of the members said the Mosier water issues are due to irrigation, not domestic use. Domestic water use is very low compared to irrigation. I guess I still have some concerns with the cumulative impact of development on water. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, as always, Sheila. We appreciate it. All right, and I believe that's it for folks signed up online. So we're going to go ahead to folks here in the room. First, we have Gary LeBold. Yep, come on up. 3 minutes.
Chance you can put that slide up you had earlier that showed the colors of the R5 and R10 zones. It's early in your presentation.
Which portion of the map?
Yeah, right there, perfect. I think there was a question. I was wanting to help clarify. Whoops. There we go. Thank you. Perfect. There was a question earlier about why wasn't there more R5 zones showed up near the Mosier area?
That's scenic area, that's why.
Yeah, 1, that's right. And 2, this road is 7 Mile, which winds through here. It's not real clear, but it comes out over there. And just for reference, I'm talking today about my R5 property, which is right up here at the tip of this yellow zone off of 7 Mile. Just so you know where I'm coming from.
Great, thank you.
And some of my statements are just very similar to what your feedback was that you put that slide up, so I can't really bring a whole lot new to this whole thing. The water supply is an issue, as you might have heard in the commissioners meeting of March 5th. The water master, Robert Wood, said that they have focused on several problem areas in Wasco County, and top of that list was the Mosier and 7 Mile area of the county on the west side, which is where I live. So I'm concerned about the water supply, and I don't know how we evaluate that before we add more population, but it seems to me we should always add more infrastructure before we add population. If you had a subdivision in town, you would make sure the roads are in, the water lines are in, and then you'd let the people in. And I think if we don't get this right now, we can't come back later and fix it. Another question they brought up was the infrastructure of the roads. I live on the road is Richard Road, and it's 3/4 of a mile long from the paved highway north. And at this point, there's about 12 to 14 developed properties on the street. And that road was never brought up to standards. And I think that was a mistake, not by you guys, but from previous administrations way back should have made the developer bring these roads up to standards so that we could maintain them today. That wasn't done. And if we go ahead and allow more development on roads that are underdeveloped at this time, I think we're adding to the problem. In an example, on my street, there are 3 properties already have ADUs on them. And the county's aware of them, and they're still being allowed. And one of them you mentioned earlier was mother-in-law homes for sick people. They were given a permit for that, and the county never followed up on it. The person died 4 years ago, and the county is relying on citizens to file a formal complaint. I have an ADU here on this side, I have an old folks home over here, and I have a home up there. I'm on 3 sides. I have citizens that are not conforming. If I file a complaint on all 3 properties, I'll probably be the most unpopular neighbor on the street, and I don't want to be that person. So I would ask the county, whatever they approve, that they provide a mechanism for follow-up to the permits that they give. Otherwise, it turns the citizens into policemen. And if this gentleman at arm's length is talking to someone, it's a less emotional situation than if I go talk to my neighbor. Was that my timer?
It is. I'll give you another 30, 40 seconds. 45
Thank you.
seconds.
I'm almost
Yep.
done. Currently, the road maintenance on our road is done by myself and one man who's almost 80 years old, who's had 2 strokes. If we allow more population there and more beating up on the roads, how are we going to take care of those roads? I understand there's been a lot of discussion in the commissioners meeting about maintaining these roads, and I appreciate we have more discussion about that. In our case, if we could just get the county to bring us in 2 or 3 loads of rock a year, we have the facilities to grade the road and fill all the potholes. We're already doing that, and we do all the plowing of the snow, so before we put more population and more work on these older people, I would ask that we find some way to mitigate going forward, so we are having to try to solve it back here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
I have a question.
Oh, please, go ahead.
You're talking about the need a mechanism for follow-up. Were you talking about temporary hardship housing, or are you
Yep.
talking about ADUs?
Well, ADUs is going forward. I was given an example of a hardship permit that was given 7 years ago, and the person died 4 years ago, and the house is still there. More people are living in it, and it's like, so it's non-conforming, I would say.
Thank you.
From an ADU after.
I'm sorry?
It's become a hardship, ADU after a hardship.
Exactly, correct.
All right. Thank you. And we do have one more in-person testimony, Matthew Garrett. You gonna pass? Okay. All right. Well, if that is it in person, there's no one else who has signed up online.
For 5 more minutes. Thank you.
Okay, let's see here. So if there's no further testimony and no request that the record remain open, then we're gonna go ahead and close this public hearing, and it is now considered closed, and the planning commission is gonna enter into deliberation. And with that, I would love to hear what folks here on the commission are thinking about everything we've heard today.
Chair, can I ask really quickly, are there any questions for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, or can we send him out into the wild?
That is a great question. Does anyone, Russ, Commissioner Hargrave or Commissioner Davis, any questions for our guest here?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay.
And neither do I. Thank you.
All right, then it's catch and release.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Okay, I'd love to hear folks' thoughts.
Well, I'll start. After all this review and paperwork, I guess the main thing, one thing I'll start with is the removal of size limits on the manufactured home, the width size, and that it be a 20-year-old or less unit. I think 20 years is putting the max on wiring and plumbing and that type of thing before it starts to fall apart. Technology, I think 20 years now is okay. I would have said 15 years a few years ago, but with modernization, I think it's.
Yeah.
Especially into the areas where they're wanting to put these, the Wamick area, they're not a full-time use, the majority of them.
Okay. And did you have any thoughts about the roof pitch size?
Oh, I think it has. I have this one. I think it needs to be the steeper roof pitch for the snow loader,
The suggested 3x12.
3x12.
All right. Thank you,
You're
Commissioner.
on a 2-acre parcel. I'm sorry, I forgot that.
For ADUs?
No, this is for these mobile homes. Isn't that up? Go ahead and I'll come back to it.
Commissioner Davis, do you have some comments, thoughts?
I definitely agree with the snow load. And you have that problem up there, especially in the Pine Hollow area. So the steeper, the steeper pitch and all. I'm more tendency to stay with the 15-year on it, but you have a good point there. But my vote would still be at 15 years.
Okay. And Commissioner Davis, do you have any thoughts on the ADUs, especially in terms of acreage?
It's 2 acres, yes.
So, Marcus,
Yes, sir.
I don't know if there's a specific list of questions you want input on. I think Kelly and Daniel did have a punch list, but in general, I am in favor of the proposal, the proposed changes. The one thing I wanted to note specifically is that in terms of the change to the buffer zone language, specifying 10% of the parcel rather than limit impact or don't have any impact on adjacent resource uses. The point I wanted to make is that they're not the same, and in most cases, or in some cases, limiting it to 10% of the parcel is a lot narrower than not having a negative impact on adjacent resource use. They may be on 10% of the parcel and still have a negative impact. So I was a little concerned about that change of wording because it did seem narrower.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner McIntyre, do you have any?
Well, we should go through the punch list. I do have some concerns about accessory structure sizes. I'll come back to that, but ADUs, I think if we're trying to encourage more housing options, I think the 2 acres is good. With the higher roof pitch on mobile homes. What's the other ones?
The age.
I'm leaning towards the 15 years. I think the better the higher the standards, the better. What's the other one?
The size limit.
No. That's it. Okay.
Okay.
All right, well,
Nichols?
I will go with 20 years, because I don't see a lot of magic development between 2005 and 2010 in terms of wondrous changes in wiring and plumbing and whatnot. I would think that 2005 would be sufficient. That's 20 years. I'm also think, yes, absolutely 2 acres is where we want it to be, because we're going to get there eventually, and I would rather encourage it now where we have much more control over it than down the road. So all of that. And as far as the ADUs, I think it's great. I'm all for it. Yeah. Did I miss anything? Okay.
Roof pitch.
Roof pitch.
Roof pitch.
Well, the roof pitch, definitely the steeper, no question about it. I think we're all unanimous on that one for sure. Do you need a motion?
Are you ready to make a motion?
Yeah, but I mean, I
Or do you
noticed
wanna
we
discuss
have some
it?
disagreements on at least the 15 or the 20 years.
So I could put forward to, I do have a draft motion for the commission. I could put forward to, I could kick the can to the board to make the call with 15 or 20 year and let them know that there was not unanimous consensus on that issue.
Could I just make a comment on the 15 or 20-year question? Which is we need to not only think about the age of the home when it is being moved in, but the fact that that's as new as it'll ever get. So if it's 15 years now, it'll be 25 years in no time. And I think part of the concern from the citizens that I heard was not only is the wiring up to code, but will it become a dilapidated structure that never moves from the site? And so part of that calculation is what's the asset value? Is it worth enough that people will maintain it? And if not, that they would resell it and remove it. So I'm sitting here thinking not so much about the 15 or 20, but where it would be 10 years down the road or so. So I'm not going to vote for one or the other, but I do think there's more than just wiring codes that people were concerned about.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that if I may, Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Davis.
I've just been reading up on some of the aging. I think that Russ has a really good point. The aging between a 15 and 20 year is starting to get over the curve. Okay, meaning that the article was basically saying that by the time it hits 15 years, you're at that point. You're going to have to start replacing some major components of that, and it then starts to even accelerate thereafter. It depends on how well you maintain it. So the point here is, well taken, when what Russ is saying is maybe not so much as the 15 or 20 years. I know some people who have 60-year-old cars that just look pristine, but also is that I also know some people that have a 3-year-old new car that looks like hell, so I think he has a really good point. So it's sort of like, are we really talking apples and apples here when we say 15 or 20 years? It's a question and I don't have an answer for.
Maybe it's more about the asset value than the age.
Yeah. I think that would be a much better value, or a much better
Measurement.
yes.
I would respectfully submit it's going to be difficult determining a fair market value for a lot of reasons, because everybody's opinion, it's whatever finally sells. It's not necessarily there's a high standard unless you're talking about actual conditions of the wiring, what kind of wood is being used, all that sort of specifics. So I don't know. I agree with the concept. I don't know if it'll work out in practice.
Well, maybe what you do is say it's 15 years, that's the rule. And then there's a discretionary path where if you've got a 20-year-old one and you can prove that the asset value is there, that you might have a discretionary path to get approved with that older unit.
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, I'm for that. That's a very good point, Russ.
Well, even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while.
And I'm sorry, I did miss that. So your proposal, can you repeat your proposal one more time?
Sure. That we would go with the more restrictive 15 years, because that way, it does have substantial asset value. But we would allow a discretionary path, however that is, so that they could prove that in their case did have sufficient high asset value, maybe comparable to a 15-year one would be the way to clearly define that. And there's a discretionary path so that an older unit could get approved if the asset value was, let's say, equal to comparable unit 15 years old.
Okay. All right, well, I'm gonna make it just a few quick comments. I mean, I think obviously there are a number of mandatory updates we have to make here. I don't have any objections to those. In terms of these optional updates we're talking about, I think there's obviously consensus here on the roof pitch to go higher with 3x12 on manufactured mobile homes. I do appreciate this idea of a more restrictive 15-year requirement, but with a discretionary path. If that's something we can go ahead and recommend to the county commissioners to discuss and decide. And then it does sound like the consensus is that folks are in favor of the 2 acres, and also there seems to be support for this optional ADU amendments. But I do also just really want to recognize that it sounds like, you know, there's some genuine concerns, especially folks in the Mosier area of around water and fire. So I just want to recognize that, and would also want to pass that along. Of course, they can also reach out to their commissioners to discuss those. We are just advising this to the county commission, and it's ultimately their decision. So would encourage folks to continue to speak to your county commissioners. And also if there's a way we can kind of pass that information along as well from us, that we recognize and value those concerns. With that, I'm not quite sure what sort of resolution amendments would need to be made, or if that's enough on the record in order for us to move this forward to the county commissioners in terms of the actual language of the amendments.
Yep, I've got a motion sort of prepared. Before I move on, I wanted to acknowledge that there was a fair amount of question and discussion about the accessory structure and building proposal. So I wanted to make sure that the planning commission was able to address those concerns before we make a motion to recommend approval. And I think the commission raised some really fantastic points. And obviously we did have one citizen express some concerns. So we're all ears for recommendations. Again, those don't need to be clear and objective. So you have a little bit of latitude, but if you'd like to suggest a 10% lot coverage and to do away with 100, it seems like the 150% was problematic, or we could change it to the applicant doesn't get to choose, staff gets to choose. There are a couple options there. But I'd really like to hear that feedback sort of operationalized in a way that's helpful.
I would love to give you high level feedback, which is, I think, first of all, the restriction on accessory dwellings is unusual, if not unique. So it stands out as an anomaly that this county has that restriction. And what I noticed when I moved in, and I notice it much more now after I've been here 35 years, is the number of stuff people are forced to keep outside. There's all kinds of implements and other tools and other raw materials that would normally be kept inside. And I ask people, well, why do you have to keep that outside? Well, we're not allowed to build a large enough accessory structure. So if this means that we'll all be able to put our stuff under cover, finally, I think that's great.
Well, I'm going to say you're excessively persuasive here in your arguments today. Because that sounds like a really excellent thought to me. So I withdraw any objections I might have had to that. And let's go with what was actually proposed. It's got the most flexibility of any of it.
I just have a question with the 20% or the 150%, the either or concept. You're gonna have a shed house, ratio Where if you have a small house, you're gonna have a huge shed or barn next to it that's gonna overshadow. It just seems to me like it should be either one or the other, but not either or to choose from. That's just my feeling.
Well, I think the reason that I would go with that is because the explanation is if they started out with a very small house to begin with, then you're limited to basically a tool shed that's a 4x4 or something like that, if you have a very small house to begin with. Yeah, I wonder if it would satisfy if there was some sort of numeric value put in when you consider this is a small place that you want to allow the 150% more for. If there's some kind of standard by which this is a small house, so we're gonna allow that, if that would be helpful, if that's just confusing things more.
Could I give you an example? So my neighbor is actually in this situation. His wife has passed, so he lives alone, and he has a very small house. What he does is he works in his shop. He's a retired carpenter. He loves doing work. He works for, does a lot of the stuff for the community around here. And it's so important for him to be able to have an accessory building that's significantly larger than his house. He doesn't need a big house, but he does need to be able to do his carpentry. And I don't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I don't either. I think that's a good point, especially out here in the rural area. You see that a lot, and I'd just like to see all the stuff go into a shed.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood, but the people have the choice of 20% or 150%. I think it should be one or the other, not one or the other. I don't have a problem with a large shed, but they can either use 20% of their full 2 acres, give or take some of that, or they can go 150% of their house. I think it should be one or the other determination.
So, could the planning staff kind of explain the rationale for having the two different options?
Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, it was particularly for small parcels that with a small house. That is why we thought of if you already have a small house on a small parcel, you are restricted on the amount of room you have in general. So it's tougher for someone to fit 2 small buildings when you're limited versus one larger. So that was part of the thinking for AR, especially around Pine Hollow. If you only with your house and drain field can only fit maybe 1 or 2. If you have to try to fit 2 smaller buildings meeting building code requirements for spacing between buildings and things like that, you're limited more. So those were the type of things where we did think of the either or for the smaller parcels, where if someone, this would restrict them from total size they could do. Versus, now I can only fit 1 small shed or 2 small sheds versus 1 larger shop or something like that. So, or strangely shaped properties, which are always hard to plan for, but that was our reasoning was, if the extra space that you need between buildings, if you have more buildings on a small parcel was our thinking in that.
Okay, anything else?
It'd be helpful to look at the language again, Chair. You think the language in here is confusing?
Well, it was even when I read it, I forgot that there was the either or, and I was like, it's all in one bullet.
Right.
So it was more of just that for me. It was easier in our language where it's spaced out to show the above and under.
So how does the rest of the commission feel about this either or option on property smaller than 2 acres?
Well, it is confusing, obviously, given the discussion.
So would the commission be comfortable striking one of those options for properties smaller than 2 acres, like going with 150% only?
I would be.
Does that seem reasonable or?
I want more maximum flexibility. We have spent a lot of our time in this building and past people restricting things for people. I would like to make things a little easier. Things are not going to get easier out there, given the general state of the affairs in the nation these days. Let's not put any further restrictions on them.
So if that's so if I'm hearing that, then that would mean we keep the language that we have now that gives those options of essentially the larger of the two, the individual wanted to build.
I'm okay with the language that's there. My only comment is I think it's a little confusing, but
Well, that's, I just want to point out that the language on the slide is not the language that's in the actual amendment that's in our packets. So that just happens to be a thing on the slide that was written a little confusingly by accident.
The summary,
Yes.
yeah.
Would it be helpful, Chair, to pull up the actual language?
I think folks are probably okay on it.
Okay.
Would anyone like to see the specific language?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, then Chair, I've taken the liberty of preparing a motion for somebody to read based on our conversation today. And wanted to alert the commission that Commissioner McIntyre ahead of the hearing did share a few Scrivener issues with me that staff will address before the board hearing. Do you want me to move Russ out of the way?
All right, so if someone's willing to make this motion, this looks like it reflects our.
I'm moving you to the side, Russ.
Yeah, I'm not bashful. I'll be happy to do it. I move to recommend approval of proposed revisions, including allowing ADUs on rural residential properties 2 acres or larger and requiring manufactured homes to meet the 15-year standard with an additional discretionary pathway for asset value and the 3x12 roof pitch standard by the Wasco County Board of Commissioners. In addition, staff should address noted Scrivener issues.
Wait, for a second.
Should that be to the Wasco County Board of Commissioners?
We are recommending approval
By the Wasco County.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay, so we have a motion from Commissioner Nichols and a second from Commissioner Ashley. All right, all those in favor of approval of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, the motion carries, and so we will go ahead and rely on staff to move forward with that to the Board of Commissioners. At this point, we've reached the conclusion of the hearing. And we have just passed the previous motion to send this on to the Wasco County Board of Commissioners, and the matter will be heard on May 7th and May 21st, 2025 by that board, barring any rescheduling. And with that,
Do you want director's report, Chair?
you would love a director's
Okay,
report.
We've got 2 directors now, so you
Excellent.
get 2 directors.
Okay, and with that, we're gonna close the hearing and open it back up to the director's report.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being attended. So what a thrill to have the whole commission here tonight and several in person. Really, really appreciate that. We have been moving along with the hearings officer, and thanks to this commission for enabling us to do that. We are still waiting for approval from the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture on the scenic area regulations. So if something happens before we get the thumbs up from USDA, you may still have to hear a scenic area appeal, but just know generally we've been really happy with that, and citizens have been really happy with the hearings officer standards. So that's been great. The next issue we are likely to bring before you is next year. We have to do some map updates with the FEMA floodplain. We did get word about those updates are now closed. There will be no other appeal period, and also with the overlay zone 2. So it'll be, I think, lively hearings and kind of a heavy lift, but we look forward to doing that. I also, before I pass it over to Daniel, who has some other substantive updates, I wanted to make this body aware that I have been participating very aggressively in the legislative session this year. I am currently the president of our Association of Oregon Counties Planning Directors Group. And in that capacity have been working in concert with our lobbyist, who is from the Association of Oregon Counties. There's a lot, over 4,000 bills this year. It's been a brutal, long session. And there is a lot of push and pull on all sides to fundamentally change our land use system. And I've been working very hard to try to maintain the integrity, particularly with respect to farm and forestry. So if you happen to be paying attention, you may have seen my name submitting testimony on some of those bills, and I appreciate the board's forbearance in allowing me to do that. It's been a real asset. As I mentioned, there's also been some rulemaking that's happened at the state level with respect to some of our rules. So this is all a preamble to say that in addition to the map updates, it is likely we will need to open up the ordinance again next year to make some state mandated updates. So if you leave today and you think you scratching your head and you're thinking about something else that you'd like, you think you'd like to tweak, it is likely we're going to come back next year. I hope it's a little bit of a narrower scope. But given the tenor of the legislature, likely to be housing related and likely to be pretty significant changes. So I'm happy to talk offline about any of that or my work with the legislature this year, but I will kick it over to Daniel, who has some additional updates.
The first update is from Jency, Chair Swift. She would like you to sign the minutes.
Yep.
Okay.
This is very contemporaneous.
So I've got quite a list. It almost went to 2 pages, but in this case, I was able to squeeze those margins. So I've got a lot of projects that are kind of on the back end, almost complete, and quite a few projects on the front end that we've just started. So the first piece I'll talk about is our 2024 Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan. We wrapped up our portion in December, I believe it was, and submitted it to OEM, Oregon Emergency Management, and then they forwarded it to FEMA. So in fact, I just received an email today that FEMA is still reviewing our natural hazard mitigation plan, and hopefully we get the green light, thumbs up, and we'll be taking that before the Board of Commissioners for final approval. The interesting piece of this is that we've always had, since I've been here and before, the city of the Dalles as a participant within our multi-jurisdictional NHMP, but we were able to add the cities of Mosier, Maupin, and Duffer. So this is a big lift for those small communities, and they will be able to, and they have outlined action items for their individual communities. They've outlined their community's needs with regards to hazards mitigation. So I think that they should get an applause for that. That was a lot of work. It was a lot of work for Sean and myself to include those new communities. It was only expected that we would include Mosier, but we were able to get Maupin and Duffer as well. And so hopefully next year, or well, in 5 years, we can close the gap and get Antelope and Shaniko as well. So the next piece is, and you may very well know that we were awarded the Community Wildfire Defense Grant through U.S. Forest Service. It's $6 million over 5 years. One of the key portions of that is to hire a wildfire coordinator, which we have, Melissa Napoli. We've hired her. She's an excellent project manager as well as a grant manager. She's working with a variety of subrecipients to move defensible space work forward, as well as fire fuels reduction on our roads in Ty Valley, Wamak, as well as Juniper Flats. So that work is proceeding on schedule, on time. The next piece of this is our road hazard assessment project. It's another action item associated with our 2019 natural hazards mitigation plan. We have well over 100+ miles of what we call local roads of public access. So these are roads that were platted with usually with subdivisions over the course of the 20th century. But they didn't have associated public funding for maintenance, road maintenance, or they didn't have private agreements for road maintenance. And so in 2019, there was a question of the condition of these roads, specifically for wildfire emergency responders. And so that action item was included in the plan at that time. We've executed that action item. We're on the tail end of it, actually. It included the purchase of a 360-degree camera. So the grant afforded us that. We've partnered with Public Works, the Surveyor's Office, as well as ODF. The surveyors took about 6 months, 6 to 7 months to drive the various roads throughout Wasco County and actually get imagery of those roads, and then uploaded it to Google Maps. So at this time, any emergency responder, the public can actually look at the condition of those roads. And then planning got involved, myself as well as an assistant planner, Dustin Williams. We developed a test. So we're taking subjective photographic imagery and aligning it with objective road and fire safety criteria that we have in our land use ordinance to create a test for wildfire experts to actually look at the imagery and then score those roads. And of course, all of this was called for in the action item. It didn't really tell us how to do it, so we had to figure out how to do it. And with the data that we've collected over the course of the last year, we've developed a preliminary map. So in a nutshell, it just scores the roads, green, good, yellow needs work, and then red in very bad, poor condition. And so right now the data and the maps are with the variety of wildfire experts. So Ty Valley, Wamak, Juniper Flats, McFur, Mosier, RFPD, all of the chiefs have been given the opportunity to review the data and give us the thumbs up on what they agree with and what they don't agree with, so we can go ahead and reassess that data. This data can be used for a wide variety of things. It can be used to prioritize road maintenance funds, potentially. It can be used to assess progress. So Melissa, she can use this for the CWDG to actually assess progress on roads that the CWDG grant is actively working on. So we can go year one, take pictures, assess it using the test criteria, and then take pictures of it 5 years later, assess it, test it, and we can actually visualize success. So this gives us a really good measurement or a mechanism to provide a measurement of success. So I think that hopefully that this mechanism could be shared amongst other jurisdictions, and they can use this mechanism to test trouble roads that they have. It can be used for driveways. It can be used for a lot of different things. So the next one on the list is our transportation system grant. So I think this was briefed a couple of sessions ago that we were awarded the transportation system grant to update our transportation system plan, which is from 2009. So it's 16 years old. And it is pretty outdated with regards to relevant action items. So it didn't exactly make that 20-year mark before it needed to be re-updated. We were awarded the grants, and I've been working with Sean as well as Arthur Smith, the Wasco County Public Works Director, to develop an initial statement of work that will kind of drive what we need and what we want going forward from the contractors who are going to help us put together this plan. So that draft was submitted to our ODOT representative 2 weeks ago. So right now it's just being reviewed by ODOT as well as DLCD. So the next item I have is our total maximum daily load implementation plan for the John Day River Basin and Miles Creek areas. Kelly had actually developed the initial plan in 2019, I believe. And we have to update those plans every 5 years. And so I was tasked with going ahead and updating that plan. What we've done is we've combined both the Miles Creek and the John Day River plans into one plan. Essentially, it's designed to reduce non-point source pollution for both of those waterways. So John Day actually has been identified as a river that has heat non-point source pollution and bacteria non-point source pollution. And then Miles Creek's, it's primarily heat non-point source pollution. So that plan, or the draft plan, was submitted to Department of Environmental Quality last week. So they're reviewing it, and we'll see where we go from there. Internally, we've decided to do an archiving project. We have paper documents going all the way back to the 1970s, 1960s, and we have a real issue with having electronic formats of those documents, and it makes real hard work for our current planning team who have to in many cases do a lot of research on specific properties. This has been a long-standing issue that we're trying to tackle. And so Jency and I have hired a contractor, and with their sole purpose is to scan these documents, archive these documents, sort these documents. And so Jency's really leading the way on that, and we're moving forward on it. The hope is that it unifies into one area, one location, all of these documents that will hopefully make life a lot easier on our current planners, especially when they're trying to figure out fidelity on our digital archives. So this is going to be a big deal for us. So it also makes it a little bit easier. Oh,
I'm assuming you're going to make these searchable PDFs so that you can search all of them at once.
we're going to try. We're going to
Okay.
try. Some of these documents are potentially, especially the legislative records are extremely long, but yes,
Okay.
in many cases. So the final piece I have here is a FEMA. As Kelly mentioned, FEMA is looking to update their maps sometime in 2026. But I did want to bring up the pre-implementation compliance measures. They haven't gone away. The last time we met on that was in November, Election Day. About 2 weeks later, FEMA submitted an amended version of their model ordinance, their model floodplain ordinance, as well as an amended version of their habitat mitigation guide. We were able to secure a continuance until May 7th on this matter before the commissioners. So that issue hasn't gone away. Currently, I believe there's a request for an injunction, but we don't have any additional information on the court proceedings on that. So with regards to us being able to put a pause button on this due to an injunction of enforcement of these these compliance measures, we don't have any further information on that. So I'm still working out the potential financial liabilities, legal liabilities, as well as other issues regarding these pre-implementation compliance measures. But I just wanted to let you folks know that this hasn't gone away, so it's still here. Right now, I have DLCD is reviewing our code, our recommended code that we're trying to or that we've submitted for approval to hopefully give us a little bit more understanding of any kind of liabilities or issues that exist within the model code right now. So, but with that, I'll open it up to questions on any one of these items that we've been working on or are working on. So. Yes, so there were concerns, those concerns were relayed to all of the subrecipients, proceed at your own risk. Some of the subrecipients have reimbursements on a yearly schedule. Some have it on a monthly schedule, some on a quarterly schedule, so the liability is different for each subrecipient, so. And then we have had some recent alterations, just it's kind of the nature of these agreements. As time goes on, you're gonna find problems that you have to adjust with either in the IGA itself or within the grant, so. And we did apply for, we were able to make it. We were approved for CWDG round 2. We were able to apply for CWDG round 3. So that was kind of in the news over the last month or two. Melissa was with me. She did a great job briefing the Board of Commissioners about that grant. We weren't too sure we were able to get that in. That includes the Mosier area as well as the 7 Mile Chenoweth area. So very similar work, defensible space work. So very private property oriented type of work. So we'll see if we actually receive those funds.
Any questions, Commissioner Davis or Mr. Hargrave?
No, thank you.
None, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for everything. Thank you staff for everything today, and as always, we with that.
Commissioner Swift, this is Jency. I did not hear your last comment.
Yeah, barely hear you.
Sorry, my mic was not on. I just wanted to thank staff for all of their work, not only for the hearing today, but just overall in general, and appreciate all the work that they do. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Good to see everybody.
Thanks. Take care.